My background is I've been in the environmental industry since the mid 80s, and I've participated in the ASTM standards and all appropriate inquiry since then, and continue to participate in helping write the standards. In addition, back in 2008, I helped write the standards for the record search with the risk assessment for SBA loans, 7A and 504. So I have a little bit of experience. You can ask me any questions as we go along in chat. I don't know it all, so maybe a few of you can educate me on a few things. And all comments and all questions are welcomed. There is no dumb question, so please ask them all. Our goal is to, those of you who aren't current clients, is to earn your business by helping you understand the record search with risk assessment, which is called an RSRA. I have a scratchy throat today, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm going to cough once in a while. And that's about it. So does anyone have any questions? Would you like to get started? Someone send me a chat, say, let's go for it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Today we're talking about the record search with risk assessment, RSRA. ERS does provide this. The standards are very clear. One of the things that isn't really pointed out in the report, but is pointed out in the standards, and which is, of course, the SBA SOP 50105K. And we're in Chapter 3, Environmental Policies and Procedures. There's a couple requirements that a lot of people aren't complying with. And so I'm just going to address them up front. So any environmental professional, and the report has to be done by an environmental professional as defined by all appropriate inquiry from the EPA. That means they have to have certain experiences and stuff. All environmental professionals are also required to have environmental insurance. If they can't provide you with a certificate of insurance that has environmental right on it, they may provide you an environmental insurance certificate saying they have errors and omissions, professional liability insurance, but that doesn't mean it covers environmental. If it doesn't have the environmental rider, you're not covered. This is an environmental report, and you're not meeting the standard. And they do check this. The reviewers at the SBA do check it now and then. The other thing they put in the recent updates is that you're required to include the aerial photos you review and the city directories you review in the appendix of the report. They had a lot of people who said they reviewed certain things, and they later on found out that they didn't review them. Now, what's really also important is if in the history of the property, any time there was a dry cleaner, whether there's just one notice of a dry cleaner found in a city directory in 1945, and that's all we found, then it's still required to not only do a phase 1, but it's required to do phase 2 vapor sampling, period. They had so much trouble with dry cleaners being either adjacent on the subject side or in a strip mall that's getting the loan, that kind of thing. And they had to demand that or put in the law, and it is law now, that you have to do a phase 1 and a phase 2 if there's any hint of a dry cleaner ever being on the subject property. So keep that in mind. If your current consultants don't have the proper environmental insurance, aren't environmental professionals as defined by the EPA, all appropriate inquiry, and aren't letting you know that you need to do a phase 1, phase 2, that means the RSRA becomes high risk, then you've got some bad consultants and you're opening yourself to huge liability as a bank. So let's move on a little bit. So remember, in 2008, I participated. I was one of 3 consultants with 6 SBA attorneys who wrote these environmental policies and procedures, which are now law within the SOP 5010-5K. Okay? Any questions so far? Let's go ahead and move on and see what this presentation says. So, just as it says, record search with risk assessment. Record search is the governmental databases. There's companies like ours, ERS, who search the government databases. We actually download them, update them every quarter as per all appropriate inquiry or ASTM for phase 1. And we gather all this data and we print out what's called a rec check or lender check report. In a lender check report, you get risk ratings and they're great environmental screens. In the rec check report, there's a little bit of interpretation that you have to do. And we're going to go over the rec check report a little later. But basically, what you get here is all the databases search to certain distances around your subject property. So the subject property address is automatically inserted when you order an RSRA into our data. The lat long is identified, and we search all these databases. Like in California, there could be 40, 50, 60 databases. And we search for the subject property and adjacent to see if there's any concerns that could affect the property. And so part of this search, we need this search so the environmental professional can review it. Now, let's say your RSRA comes back high instead of low risk. Because part of the standard is you got to define whether it's a low risk site or it's a high-risk site. That's what the RSRA does. If it's high risk, you got to go to a phase 1 if you want to continue down the process of an SBA loan. So, if it's high risk and you got to do a phase 1, ERS doesn't do phase 1. But the rec check report within the RSRA is exactly the same radius search report that the phase 1 company is going to get and pay for anyway. You should get a discount on your phase 1s, and they can use this rec check report. There's no reason they can't. And all our reports, including the RSRA and everything, is backed by $2 million worth of environmental, remember that key word, environmental errors and emissions professional liability insurance, including this rec check report. So let's see here real quick. No, let's just keep continuing. So any questions on the record search. This is the record search. The next part of an RSRA report includes the historical. Remember, in the historical, we're looking for uses. That's all the historical is. We're looking for uses of the property. In the aerial photos, we may look for just a little bit more. If we get really good aerial photos, we can go ahead and see staining, significant storage of hazardous materials or potentially hazardous materials, or we may see ponds, lagoons, dump sites, big, huge trash piles. And the key thing that a lot of people don't think about, agricultural use. And that's what we pick up in aerial photography. So let's say your site is going to be, or is currently, an apartment complex, but it was previously, historically, agricultural use. Well, you know, on agricultural use, you get herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, right? They use all those things, and all those things, especially 10, 20 years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, had some nasty chemicals in it. And I'll give you a prime example of that. One of the nasty chemicals would be for an orchard, let's say an orange grove, they would use arsenic and spray arsenic on the trees to kill rodents and birds from picking their fruit. And arsenic doesn't biodegrade down. It just sits, and it usually sits on the surface, about 2-3 feet of soil. So if they built a apartment complex and didn't sample the soil beforehand, all the bare soil around the apartment complex and the playgrounds and whatever could be contaminated and could be a risk to that site. And that's something that should be addressed in the RSRA. Now, how would you address something like that? Well, you'd have to go back to the previous owner who sold the orange grove to the builder, or to the builder, interview them and see if they sampled the land for pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, right? And if they didn't, then it's going to be recommended that you do that sampling, and you're going to have a high risk RSRA. So that's just one example, and there's a million different examples that can make a high risk, but that's one of them. So you need to keep that in mind. If your environmental professional identifies that for you, they're protecting you in the loan. It's not meant to ruin your deal. It's meant to help you. So the next thing we have here is city directories. This is a typical page. See where I'm clicking on right there? Whoops, let's go back. See where my mouse is right there? That's a typical page of a city directory. And we usually try to get city directories in 5 or 10 year increments back to the 1930s, 40s. Sometimes we can go into 1800s, depending upon how old of area, the property is. I mean, if you're in downtown San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Miami, Dallas, we're going to pick up city directories going way back. And what city directories do is they list the person's name if it's a residence, and if not, they list the name of the business that is there. And usually by the business, Holiday Cleaners is going to tell us what's there. Why is this history important? Because 30, 40, 50 years ago, people don't remember what was at that site. And a lot of times the building could have been torn down 30 years ago and the site's still currently vacant and they're getting a loan to build something, right? And nobody remembers what was on that site 30, 40 years ago. Well, the directories remember. They tell us exactly what was on that site and when the road was first built and the cross streets. And if your site's on the corner, we get what's across the street, all 4 adjacent sites, and we get the history. And we're trying to identify the potential for contamination on the subject property, whether it's a low or high risk. That's it. And so city directories are really important. And they're really called, within the city directories, they have reverse directories. And what a reverse directory is, or section in a city directory is, it gives you addresses, street addresses. So it lists block after block of a street with addresses and what was there. And so we look up your address and your block and compare it. And it's pretty cool. The next thing is fire insurance maps. Fire insurance maps are usually older. They stopped doing them the last 10 years, but they did keep doing some of the major cities up to maybe 1990. But they'll go all the way back to the 1800s, and they're usually of the old downtown sections of major cities. Rural sites, you won't find any fire insurance map. So fire insurance maps only come in play probably about 10% of the time. But a fire insurance maps, what happened is, in the old, they used to send out guys with these big books, and they'd walk around the city and they would really draw out the buildings and look at the buildings, what they're made of wood, whether they have a fire hydrant right next door. Do they have above ground storage tanks if they can see them? Do they have a sprinkler system? That kind of thing. They were designed for the fire insurance companies selling insurance, fire insurance, to use to rate what the cost of that fire insurance for that particular building would be. And so the fire insurance companies bought these books to use to rate fire insurance, and they were updated on a regular basis. And so they don't have detail on like a lot of hazardous materials or anything, but every now and then they have above ground storage tanks. They have in one case, we found that there was a theater back in the 1930s that the theater was very proud that the curtains were made out of asbestos and they couldn't burn. Well, what happened is, back in the 40s, that theater burned down, and this was a vacant land site. That theater burned down, and they pushed all the debris into the basement, then filled the rest of it up with dirt, covered it over, and the site was being used as a parking lot by the city. Think about how surprised they were to find out that they had friable asbestos underneath their asphalt parking area. Wasn't a good deal, was it? That was a high. Low risk, high risk. Sometimes people do it elevated risk or low risk. Doesn't matter what you call it. You only have 2 terms, high or low. Elevated or low. Okay, so that's fire insurance maps. So the next thing is historical topographic maps. We also look at historical topographic maps, especially rural areas. And they become important when in rural areas, because you're not going to probably get city directors. You're surely not going to get fire insurance maps. You'll probably still get aerials. But what a USGS map does is open pit mining, quarries, mines, all kinds of things, water, wells, things like that come up on the USGS map, and you want to know. So let's say you're doing an RSRA, they're getting some money to refurbish their apartment complex, and the apartment's been there, complex been there for 20 years, but 70 years ago, they had a well on site. You want to make sure that well's been abandoned properly, because that can be a vehicle for contamination and all kinds of things on the site. And so we look for things like that. So any questions on the historical use of the site? I hope that helped. Remember, this is what an RSRA report should include, and we'll eventually go over a low-risk RSRA and how to interpret it, and a high risk. So this is an environmental questionnaire. This is your typical environmental questionnaire. I'm going to bring that over here so everybody can see it. And even though you don't actually have to use this one, you can use your own internal environmental questionnaire, or you can use this one. We also send out another questionnaire. This questionnaire is great. Why is a questionnaire very important to have filled out by the owner of the property? Well, it's a legal document, guys. If they say there's no problems on this site, then, and they sign it here, they sign it on the bottom here, and they say has an environmental assessment, investigation, or report ever been performed on the property, and they say no, and you find that a phase 2 cleanup has been done on the site at a later date, you're protected. This is very important to be filled out to protect you, the lender, the buyer of the property, the bank, to protect everybody. So get these things filled out. It does answer some cool questions that are really important. And it helps us make sure we don't miss anything. And they're all key questions. We provide this document to our clients. So if you're our client, you automatically get this sent with you when you order an RSRA, if you don't already have it in-house. Any questions on this? No? Okay. So that's the environmental questionnaire that's optional. So we do also have a questionnaire for property facts, and we send that out along with when we send you the confirmation on the RSRA being ordered. And so you really need to take a look at that, and let's see if I have one handy. No, I don't have one handy, but we'll go ahead and once we look at a full RSRA, we'll see that. But the property facts is really nice because it makes sure that we have the right site address, we have the number of buildings on the site, what the site's being used for now, who the owner is, and all that stuff. And that's very important to have and start the project off right. And you always want the project to start off right, because you don't want to get down the road and find out we have incorrect information on the property. So that the property fact sheet is really important to fill out also. And Again, we provide a copy of that to our clients who order an RSRA report from us. Okay, the environmental risk determination. So it's either with low risk or high risk. Some other companies do elevated risk. We do exactly what the standards say, high or low, and that's it. And then basically then in the summary right away up front, you get to see whether your site's low or high risk. If it's low, you put it in the file and you do your loan. If it's high, you've got to go to a phase 1. In some cases, you can do a file review of something or an interview of somebody to relieve the problem, and we can do that for you for an extra fee. A lot of environmental firms don't do that. They just default to the high cost phase 1. We don't do that. We try to help you out. We also know that our reports will go through and be approved by the SBA if we do a file review or we do an interview and able to reduce the risk from high to low, because we document it in the record search with the risk assessment report. And that's how we earn your business, by saving you and your client money. And also, not lots of times, but sometimes if you get a high risk determination, it can ruin your deal with that particular buyer or seller, right? And you don't want to do that unless it's absolutely the only way to go. And so the environmental risk determination is really important. Again, it's got to be written by an environmental professional that has environmental errors and emissions professional liability insurance. And you need to get that certificate. Now, if you get a certificate that doesn't state environmental, an insurance certificate, and it just says errors and emissions professional liability insurance, the certificates always have the broker's name and phone number. Call them. If they tell you they do have environmental, you're done. You just need to document that. If they tell you, hey, no, well then you know, right? And you use the wrong environmental professional, obviously. So how do you screen whether you can do an RSRA or not up front? So basically, any non-environmentally sensitive industries, you can do an RSRA on. So medical offices, hotels, motels, child daycare services, veterinary services, vacant land, all those things you can do in RSRA. Excuse me. The SBA standards state a whole bunch of NAICS codes that you have to jump to a phase 1 on, and you cannot do an RSRA on. And it's really simple. Manufacturing plants, gas stations, dry cleaners, country clubs. Why country clubs and golf clubs? Well, first of all, they usually have underground storage tank, but they use a lot of herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, exterminating, pest controls. And these are just some of it. And again, we have a list of NAICS codes that we can provide to you if you're our client to use. And if you order an RSRA and we find out that you're on these NAICS codes, we won't charge you a thing. We just won't do the job. We'll tell you you need to do a phase 1. And we can give you recommendations for companies to do phase 1 across the United States. ERS does not do phase 1. Let's just go back here. I think they have the NAICS code sheet. And let's look at the sheet here. So These are environmentally sensitive industries. So if your site is listed as any of these NACE codes, then really you can't do an RSRA. Now remember, dry cleaners are going to say, hey, you know, I use environmentally sensitive dry cleaning fluids now. I don't have any problems. But then, so they use that for the last 4 or 5 years. But what they used for 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago is what's called either Stoddard solvent or PCE, perchloroethylene, or tetrachloroethane. That's all PCE or perc. And that's the nasty stuff. It doesn't biodegrade in the ground. People may tell you it does over time. It doesn't. Not in our lifetime. Maybe in a couple lifetimes down the road it will, but not in our lifetime. So these are the NACE codes. We'd be glad to send you a copy of these NACE codes if you're interested. And you're our client. We're not going to send any of this stuff to you unless you're one of our clients. It's very easy to become our client. Order something from us. Order a lender check or an RSRA. Our lender check with risk assessment, which is a great environmental screen for all commercial loans before even getting involved in a loan, is only $74. Okay, so that's the NACE codes. Everybody understand the NACE codes? Anyone have any problem with the NACE codes? Okay, hold on a minute because I've lost my screen. There's my screen. So I got my screen back up. So anyone have any questions? So far, am I going too fast? Is it informative? Am I going in enough detail? Anybody? All good. Super. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on here. We talked about NACE codes. So, property types. What do you use an RSRA for? Basically, anything that's non-sensitive property, not on that NACE code list. Transaction costs. It costs $329. You get them anywhere in 3 to 5 days, sometimes quicker, sometimes longer, depending upon the data and how hard it is to get the historical. Transaction cost for a phase 1 is going to cost you $1,800 to $2,400. Take 10 to 15 business days and cost you a whole lot more. We can do a rush. And you can see cost versus phase 1. So part of the problem is sometimes if you rush it, you get data gaps and data failure, but they're noted in these reports. And an RSRA does not need to be accompanied by a reliance letter, which needs to be addressed to the SBA. Phase 1 does. That's very important. And a lot of phase 1 companies, and that letter's got to be spelled out exactly how the SBA wants it, the reliance letter spelled out. It can't be changed in any shape or form by that phase 1 company. So the RSRA is a lot better approach, at least for your first step. So now, if you don't have any questions on the basic RSRA report, let's go over a couple and see how they're done. These are reports that we did, and you'll see what we provide and how we can help you. Remember, we're out to earn your business. So let's look at one of our RSRA reports. So this is a low risk report. You can see it's in Ohio. Right up front, it says whether it's low or high risk. If it's a low risk, you can literally just be done if you don't want to review anything. If you want to ensure that everything was done properly, especially if you're using a new company doing it for you or a company you've had problems with before, they should have all the backup in the thing. So basically, let's go through this. This right here is everything that's been reviewed. This is the site facts. Remember I told you about the site fact sheet that we send out? A lot of that goes into here. The identified historical uses is what we identified in all the historical sources. So you can see it's an undeveloped lot from 89 to 2019, but from 1939 to 1988, it was agriculture. Interesting, huh? Lender name, owner operator name, and then here we go through the details of the report. So the review of the environmental questionnaire, aerial photographs, and all the aerial photographs were reviewed, and an interpretation of those photographs. The site had road crafts on it from 1956 through 1988. That's interesting, huh? Historical fire insurance maps. Remember, we talked about them only in being down and down. There was no coverage. Historical city directories. And right here, the site was so rural that 8900 Eagle Ridge Court was not listed in any of the city directories. And so the north adjacent site, 8890, was. Well, why is that? Well, these city directory companies sent out postcards to just random addresses. And if they didn't get a response back, they would have put no response or no listing. And it depended on the city directory company, and we used a whole bunch of different ones. And we have people at the Library of Congress who look these things up and send us the data. Pretty cool, huh? Interviews. And so this tells you there's a T-Mobile site on site and all kinds of other things. But it also should be identified in the environmental questionnaire, question 11. Okay? The rec check report, no listings on our site or around our site. And we're going to look at that a little bit at the end in the appendix. And then the overall. Although the site was used for agricultural purposes in the past, the proposed commercial development of the site minimizes the probability of occupant to come in contact with possible residential agriculture chemicals, residual agriculture in the soil or groundwater. So because this is being developed for commercial, and pretty much the whole land will be covered, and there's no one living there, and you don't have access to kids eating the soil and that kind of stuff. We are able to make the agricultural low risk. Signed by the environmental professional, limits and liabilities. And notice the insurance. See that right there? Okay, here's the standard radius search report. Now, if you bought a lender check report, which a lot of our financial institutions do and screen all their properties for $74, the rec check, the only difference between a lender check and a rec check is it has a risk level and next step actions right here on the cover of the report. So right away you know what you need to do. This is for the environmental professional. A couple of the key things that an environmental professional does right away is they go down and look. I went way too far. The 16th of a mile radius map. That's this. Subject site is right here. No listings. Still no listings. And in the 1 mile radius, the site is so rural, there's absolutely no listings. So that's a good thing. And right away you look at that and you know there's no problems and no concerns. So this is in the appendix of every single RSRA. And you get to see all the databases and everything we check. Now, here's that environmental questionnaire filled out. They put a lot of don't know. A lot of times clients will put don't know. It always concerns me a little bit, but it's okay. But dying or dead vegetation, yes. And we interviewed her and did an interview to ask her about that, yes. And it was basically because they hadn't had rain in a long time. So it had nothing to do with anything else. So dried weeds and grasses on a vacant lot resulting from lack of water. But see how we documented everything? We have it in the report. These are all legal documents for you in case something comes up at a later date. Here's the aerial photo review. So what I want you to note, our site, what I don't see is lots of times our site will be identified by a red box. But so let's just say our site's right here for right now. And we're reviewing this and we're looking. And so what we're looking at, well, you know what? Let's find out where our site is. So remember, we have a map of exactly where our site is. So in the rec check report. So our site is at the crossroads, the southeast corner of Lakota Drive West and Eagle. Right there. So we're going to see that. So let's go to an aerial photo. So really our site's right here, right? Everybody got that? So we can look, it's vacant land in 2019. Still vacant land in 2015. Let's bob back a couple years. Oh, we go too far, we're going to lose our site, aren't we? So our site is still right here. The school here hasn't been built. Now our site is right here. This is called a blue line. They're not very clear, but at least you can see the site. Here again, 1972, vacant land. Ag. That could be dry farming. Dry farming is just as bad as row crops or anything else in 64. 56, same thing. Now we go to the USGS maps. Remember, our site is right here. We don't see anything really in our site in that. That's 2016. Oh, we better, whoop, went too far. Oh, man, I'm just zumping around. I kind of lost our site. So our site is right here, above this intersection right here. So we've got to remember that. Because remember, roads disappear as you get older. So again, our site is right about here. Nothing, nothing. And as you go through, you're going to see it's nothing. We do have a creek at one time that could have been near our site. Then we go to historical city directories. And remember, I told you, you look up the address. So here we go. And that's what a reverse street address looks like. So you basically look up the address of the subject property and see what it says. In this case, you can see right here, it just says a person's name. Well, that's a residence. Up here, it says Monarch Automation Hose, Couplings and Fittings. That's a business. And that's how they do these things. So if it's usually just the name, it's not a business. And lots of times you can figure out whether, it'll say whether it's a gas station or whatever. Here's no current listing. They didn't return the postcard. And these are all the kind of thing. But this site came up with a low. We didn't find anything other than agriculture, and we know what it was going to be developed to due to the questionnaire. And that's really important, why you need to get the questionnaire. If we didn't know what it was going to be developed, it would have been a high risk until they told us what it was going to be developed for. Tons of directories. And let's see how far back they go. We got to really reduce this. So this is a 2002 directory, and that's pretty much the end of that street. It wasn't around there till then. And remember, we're looking for Eagle, and we're able to see the site, when the site was first developed, and all kinds of stuff. Sometimes they'll say New Street, 1969, or something like that. So you have all the backup in an RSA. If your RSRAs don't have all the backup, the radius search, the aerials, and the city directories, you are not getting what you should be getting from your current consultant. So that's a low risk one. Let's go ahead and get out of this. And let's view a high risk and see why it's a high risk. Let's see something else. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's look at a high risk, and then we'll pretty much be done. If you have any questions, let me know. So here's a high risk, Grimes, Iowa. So Iowa. So right away, the first thing it says, it's high. Wow. Why is this site high? Well, first of all, I'm going to check and make sure I'm on the right site. Well, first of all, I got the address provided by the client, and it used to have a previous address of totally different. This happens on a regular basis because people either don't tell us, forget about it, or don't know. Remember, commercial properties change every 7 years. So this used to be 5166 Northwest 111th. It's very important, if you knew this ahead of time, that you had let us know, because we run all these databases based on address. So we ran the first database report on that address. We had to rerun it to cover this address. Totally different. So in 2016 to 2019, it was developed as offices on Southeast Capitol Circle. Prior to that, it was fire sprinkler systems, Del Oil, that's bad, building constructed in 94 and vacant land before. Del Oil. What is Del Oil? Could be a gas station, huh? Who knows? We're going to find out. So what makes this thing high? First of all, the environmental questionnaire didn't give us anything. The aerial photos didn't showed us vacant land, no development. Then we saw that 1976 is present. There's no development in the area. 8490 shows only building present on the west side. 2000 shows the site has now developed. So we need to really look at what caused this high. So what's nice is I'm going to go down here, and it's right here in this column, it's checked as high risk. And so why is it a high risk? Because in 1966, the site was not listed, but was in 1996, it was listed with Dell Distribution Company. Well, what's Dell Distribution? Dell Oil Company, oils and fuels. So they distributed oils and fuels. And so that means they had that stored on site, and that's a concern. So the concern is Dell Oil and Fuel Company. And that right now is enough that the site had hazardous materials on site and petroleum companies, and that's a concern. So we got confirmation of this again. Down here, we actually called the Polk County assessor and pulled the property card, and the property card showed Dell Oil and showed a garage area and an office area. Of course, we don't know exactly what they did there, but we do know they dealt in oils and fuels, and that's a concern. This interview is a low risk because the client had no idea what was done prior to him buying the property. And then in the rec check report, the radius search report, Dell Distribution was listed as an liquid industrial waste generator. So they actually disposed of hazardous materials through waste manifests. And so they had to deal in them and dispose of them. And so they're listed, and that's a red flag also. So in addition, fairly close, you have Safety Clean Corporation listed in the rec check review. And they have an open leaking underground storage tank. And based on the distance from the site, it's probably unlikely it's going to impact the site. So that isn't part of the high, but the high is that Dell Oil was listed as a generator of hazardous materials. And so right away, according to the standards, that a phase 1 needs to be done. And so you might be able to get away with doing a file review on the Dell property and an interview the previous owner, and you might be able to reduce this to low, if you can get enough information. And then, of course, all that is summed up right here. And then again, all the backup is here. So let's go ahead and just really quickly look on this rec check report. And here you go. So this is the, here's the quarter-mile radius map. And so right here, this is in the radius search report. All our radius search reports have green, yellow, or red. Green is good. It's not a concern to your property. Yellow is we don't actually know. The agency didn't supply us with enough data to determine open, close, or a concern or not. And so these points right here need to be reviewed. And then red is bad to the bone. That's that open lust safety clean site. And you can go look at the details in the detail thing. So if I wanted to bounce around a little quicker and find that detail, I could do that. And I could bounce down to detail number 9 or whatever, and I could look at it. And there's detail number 9. UST, open lust, that kind of thing. Hazardous waste disposal. They had a RCRA corrective action. All kinds of things on that site, and that the groundwater flow probably flows towards our site. So, it's something we need to look at and would have to review, but that could be an added thing to the high. And a phase 1 would address all these things. In an RSRA, they don't necessarily address these things unless we think we can resolve it with just a file review or an interview and resolve this situation for you. And we'll try to do that in a lot of cases. So that's pretty much it. That's our RSRA. That's why you need to do RSRAs. They're pretty straightforward. If you've got a good consultant doing them for you and doing them correct, you're not going to have any problems. I would recommend you at the least do a lender check, which is a radius search report with a risk rating on every property before you even do an RSRA or a phase 1, because right away you'll know whether you should jump to a phase 1 or not. And you'll know whether your SBA is going to come out low or high. And for $74, any loan that walks in the door, why get involved in it? Don't order the appraisal. Don't do a whole lot of anything until you run one of our lender check reports and know if you've got any major problems on your site. So if there isn't any questions, I think that's pretty the end. Let me, if we were interested in getting some guidance on reading the lender check reports, could you provide that? Yes, we actually do a webinar on how to interpret the lender check report and use it. And then if you ever get a lender check report that you don't understand or have a problem, or a phase one or an RSRA, even if it comes from someone else, send me a copy. Tell me what you want me to look at. Call me up and I'll review it for you and give you my 2 cents worth. And I will give you an explanation of the codes and stuff and help you in any way. And we do a webinar on the lender check and how to use it and how to interpret it. And so you've got 2 avenues. One, if you read one and you don't know why it's high risk or whatever, just give me a call and I'll go over it with you. And we also teach a class on it, and we'll teach a class on it and a webinar on it for all your loan officers and all your underwriters to help them understand both the RSRA and the lender check reports. So that is what we do for our clients. We're out to help our clients understand, do a better job, and we're out to earn your business, quite frankly. And so, yes, we'll take care of you. Any other questions? Good question. Okay, remember you can call that 800 number. You can ask for Susanna or Nadine. They're both our customer service people. We don't really have salespeople. That's how we keep our costs down. And we grow by word of mouth. People usually love us once they start using us. So, and we've got tons and tons and tons of environmental experience. So, that's about it. Any other questions? You want a copy of this presentation? You want a copy of the sample interview sheets, questionnaires, properties, site facts, anything like that, and you're a client, just let Susanna know and she'll get it to you. Okay, I can't think of anything else. If there's no more questions, have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much for attending, and really appreciate your attendance. And those of you who are clients, we really appreciate you as clients. We'll also come into a bank and do a presentation in a bank, and we've done that before. And we can do the same presentation. It's a PowerPoint. It's not a problem. Doesn't matter where you are in the United States, as long as we set it ahead enough so that I can combine a couple other clients and stuff. It works real well. If you have an association of loan officers in your area that you want us to do a presentation, we'd love to. Okay, thank you very much, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, everybody.